I was part of the first group of young composer high school fellows with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. So I was like 15, 16. You were doing your DMA, right? Or
I was doing my DMA at USC. Steve Stuckey called Don Crockett, who I think is still head of composition at USC. They had kind of assigned him a sort of a teaching, because I think he's like, I can't be there every week. I'll come every month or so, and I'll kind of supervise, but boots on the ground kind of thing. We need somebody there. And I think they just basically assigned him, like, I think it was a film composer. I have no idea who it was. And he said, no, I need so he basically called Don Crockett. And I happened to be in the right. I was I answered my phone that day, and he was like, "How would you like to, work with Steve Stuckey?" And I was like, "Is this a prank?" I had just gotten there. It was like my first or second year there, and I just moved to Southern California. And I had worked is a strong word. I'd done a program at the LA Phil, and there was a one-time collaboration between the LA Phil and USC. Do you remember we talked to you about this? Called Synergy.
I don't know. It
was awesome, and they did it once. They took 4 conductors and 4 composers. They made an orchestra of USC and LA Phil players and but they did 4 orchestral works where the conductors and the composers. It was like a camp. It was like a week-long thing, and I was an auditor. They sort of picked me as an alternate. But they did 4 composers and 4 conductors. I think it was Steve Stuckey's brainchild. He graciously gave us all kind of one-on-one meetings. So he looked over some of my music, and he might have remembered me from that time, which I think maybe sort of helped be like, oh, I know that name, and I know he's a composer. So
the 4 conductors were from USC?
No, they were from all over the place. Yeah, one was a guy I knew from Rice. Alistair Willis was, I think, from. That's his name, I knew from Rice. The composers were from all over the place as well.
So the only thing that had anything to do with LA Phil and USC was that there were USC musicians and there were LA Phil musicians, and then Stuckey was
and Stuckey was because he would have been the main new music guy.
I didn't know about that.
And we had like a session with Esapeka. Like he came we sat in the basement of the university church, and he gave us all a session, and the LA Phil did a kind of a panel. They're like, how to get a commission.
I think it was too expensive or something, or
I think it was maybe
too few people, maybe.
Maybe it was pretty. I was sort of we were all like, wow, this is incredible that this is happening. And I think it was maybe one of those things where it's like the amount of resources and energy.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of Composer Fellowship program at LA Phil has had a similar, I think, kind of, when you look at when you were there, it was just 4 composers every 2 years. And now it's, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's expanded.
I just gave a talk a couple days ago at the Beckman Center. That's where they do YOLA now, Youth Orchestra Los Angeles. That was the program that Dudamel started when he first got there. And I gave a talk, and there was 15 composers in there. There's a lot of composers. And when we started it was just me and 3 other composers, and we had no idea what we were getting into. And I don't even think Steve knew what we were getting into, to be honest. Nobody knew. But it was magical. I mean, for me, it was like a kid in a candy store. Every single week that we met. And that's why I'm still composing today, because of that program. I remember we were talking about problems and solutions. We talk about composing, right? Yeah. For us, I think for you as well, you think of composing as a set of problems that you have to solve. Yeah. Right. So I remember we did this thing with Christian McBride, the bass player.
Was it part of this the CFP? Was it?
He was part of CFP, Composer Fellowship program. There was a summer commission that we had to do.
Right.
It was 4 of us writing a response to the Rite of Spring. Do you remember this?
Vaguely, yes. This is how it was
I remember
back
so well,
in the memory banks of this.
I remember it was yesterday.
Because it was a summer thing, so it was a little nebulous, but it was hey, show up in August with a piece.
Yeah. No, it was very nebulous, and it was for this jazz bass player, and we weren't sure exactly what is he gonna want to play, because he plays a certain style, and we had to notate stuff. So it was him, jazz bass player, famous jazz bass player, plus I think it was the Sonus Quartet, string quartet.
This is sounding much more. This is now starting to sound familiar.
So we had to do.
Oh, Grand Festival. It was something on Grand. Yeah, it was something on Grand. Grand Ave Festival. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And it was at the Disney Hall. It was on the main stage, so it was a big deal for the 4 of us. Yeah. And we were supposed to write a movement, right, of one big piece that had to do with the response to the Rite of Spring. So I can't remember which movement I responded to, but I remember I never told you. I'm going to tell you this now. We did the 4 movements, and there was a problem with the way my movement connected to the next movement. I don't know if you remember this.
Right. So whoever was like following you of the
there was
four
a big problem.
Right? Okay.
Everything else worked actually because it's 4 different composers writing the same piece, right? My movement came, and I can't remember who the next composer was after mine, but there was a problem for sure because we wanted the piece to be like one big movement. We didn't really want any breaks. We wanted to feel like it was one piece. Yeah. So I remember you saying, and I felt ownership. Oh, so what happened was I felt ownership of the transition. I said, I want to be the one to solve the transition. Okay. It's my movement. Okay. And I know what the first bars of the next movement are. But then you told everybody, why doesn't everybody write a transition? And that pissed me off. I was like a 15-year-old kid fuming. I was like, AJ thinks that I can't write the transition. And it was a problem. Really, it was like a problem. And it was my thing to solve, right? So I took it.
A problem that I gave you.
That you gave, right. I was like very competitive. I didn't tell none of the other guys know that I was thinking this, but I was telling my parents, I said, AJ thinks I can't do it, this and that. AJ this, really AJ funny. That.
There's no way that I would have thought in those terms. I was probably just speaking like off.
Of course not. It was all BS. It was all in my head. That's what I'm telling you now. Yeah. It was so funny, like 15 years on. That's what thinking back in my little 15-year-old undeveloped brain. That was the.
But the demands placed on the 4 of you. Mm-hmm. I think about this with my own kids. It's like if I was being asked to do some of this stuff at 15. When I was like just nose picking my way through life, I don't know what, I would have just crumpled or something. I mean, the 4 of you, especially because we didn't know what the program would look like. I think Steve had an idea. I think he talked to Deborah Howe about it. It's kind of how to sort of shape this and how to make it go forward. He was most likely used to dealing with, Cornell grads and undergrads. And now we had this like quartet of, high school students. And, it was like, you guys had lives. You had like chores. You had like stuff to do. And we were like, hey, we need those parts for the LA Phil. Well, and I think that's the thing about it was, I think it would not have continued, by the way. If I can throw some back at you. That it would not have gone to a second session if you 4 hadn't like risen to the challenge every single time. You know what I mean? Like you basically... if that had fallen flat, I don't know what would have happened. But the 4 of you like always met whatever challenge that we were throwing.
Oh yeah, we were very supportive of each other through the whole thing, And I remember when Steve Stuckey sat us down because it was the first time, right? So he sat us down. I think it was like January or something. I can't remember the month, but it was. I can't remember that.
I thought it was the beginning of the year, but yeah.
It was like a 3-month window. He said, in 3 months you're gonna have a piece played by the LA Phil. Yeah. I'm like, we've been having pieces played by, string quartet. That's what he means, right? Yeah. No, the whole thing. Yeah. I'm like, all of them?
All of them.
How many people are we talking? Like 80 people?
60
Where is it? Is it at like some high school?
Yeah,
no, it's at Disney
basketball.
Hall. And we all looked at each other and said, holy shit, you know? I still remember it to this day, him sitting the 4 of us down. He was like very serious about it. And I think he was nervous too. About the whole thing. Yeah. But we did it, and the best part about it was we had all of our high school friends were sitting in there because it was
it was a Symphonies for Schools kind of thing, right?
So they had all these bus loads of kids coming in, and like the whole audience was kids like our age. So the people our age at that time were watching their peers have their pieces.
You were rock stars, and crazy. That was at the time. I think that program has been kind of. You may know more than me. I feel like the New York Phil has tried to do something similar sort of young composer initiatives have popped up. I don't think there were many.
The composers there are even younger, like 10 years old, 9 years old, which I think is kind of ridiculous. But I mean, our age was just barely. You know, like we barely knew how to. I didn't know barely anything about music theory. I just took like AP music theory like the year before. That's right. Which is kind of a joke.
But I mean, we were all. I mean, I really appreciate that time because I was getting paid to like. You guys were all mega talented, and they were. I'm like, I get paid to like look at this stuff and be like, great job, keep going. But to essentially to mentor with Stephen for like 2 years, I basically got to sort of be like, I got to shadow Steve Stuckey for 2 years for teaching composition. It was like a masterclass of like, you know, how to manage, not just in terms of assignments and things, but also his manner, his kind of, I don't know how you remember him. I just remember him as being actually quite patient and quite sort of, he was never like this, it must be this.
No, he was never like that.
These things, I still think about this. I can't remember whose piece it was, but it was basically, whatever piece it was like firmly like tonal D flat major, like diatonic all the way through.
Must have been Tim. Tim Colober, he always wrote in all flats. I remember that.
Yeah. So it might have been, and Steve would do this thing where he'd be like, what if it wasn't all in D flat major? It's just like the littlest, like, and you'd just everyone sort of pause and everyone would go, huh, what if it wasn't all in D flat major? And I was like, that's just such a nice way of being like, instead of being like, no, it's all, you know, you're being too timid or whatever, because nobody knew any parameters
like that. Yeah,
he was just so good at kind of just like subtly directing you, or just showing you something also, or just showing you like, hey, you know, I still use the class you're going to talk to today. I still open up that class with the cryptogram thing. Do you remember the cryptogram?
Oh, with the letters.
You pick a word, you take it. Yeah. So he the very first assignment that he gave you all, and I love the philosophy behind it too, was pick a word, you know, use a system, and there are a couple that you can choose from, right? So Bach did this, right? B-A-C-H, B-A-C, and then, or B flat, A, C, H becomes B natural, right? So that signature, Shostakovich, is the same thing. So it was just take the word and convert those letters into pitches, and then write a piece based on those pitches. And he'd done a solo cello piece, Dialogi, I think it's called, for Eleanor Frey that had the same sort of system going on.
Mm-hmm. I remember this well, yeah.
And his philosophy was really interesting, because his philosophy was, the sort of the meta lesson behind it was, you can't wait for a good idea. That you have to, you got to get going. You got to put your composer chops to work. And if you don't have, you know, your da-da-da-da or whatever, you know, you've got to generate it, and then just let your kind of craft sort of take over. It was funny because when Jim sort of succeeded him, Jim's like, I disagree. I think you should wait for a good idea. And I was like, it's just a great tool to have, just to know that you're there. Like if you're really struggling and you need something, and you need something to just generate anything that you can then kind of make sense of.
No, absolutely. I remember that to this day. Actually, that was the first assignment, and I think the piece I wrote was a solo clarinet piece based off of my brother's name, Andrew.
Okay.
I think that's what I did. Yeah. So it was. I remember that assignment well. But this reminds me a lot of. I want to get into your stuff, because you also have a piece for solo cello.
It's probably my most recent piece, technically. Yeah, it's sort of finished,
and it's also based, we're talking about Bach, it's based on a Bach cello suite,
right? Yes, it was it's like the classic, I was joking with this with another composer friend, the classic No Pressure of a very good friend of mine, fantastic cellist, Erica Wise, has a recording project which is now coming out. She's got it'll be 3 albums in total, 2 of which have already come out, and it's all 6 Bach cello suites. And she has commissioned, or at least requested, 6 pieces to kind of accompany them, which is, again, it's like, oh, no pressure. You just have to follow Bach's, like what she calls like the Bible of like solo cello writing. But I hemmed and hawed about which piece I wanted to do, and I picked the 6th suite, the D major one, because it's just so, I don't know. It's so joyful is the only word I could come up with for it.
So let's hear a couple minutes of that. This is Implied Airs over an Imaginary Drone. I love your titles. All your titles are like, let's hear it.
like a lot of my pieces, there's some kind of like quirky title that kind of gets me into, I can kind of, I can spiel about it, right?
Well, I mean, the cello suite, the original one, it starts off kind of with the drone too. Yeah. I did a similar thing like this too, where I took a CPE Bach piece for flute and piano, and then I kind of converted it in my own way to a solo flute piece, taking a lot of the Bach influence. So I'm wondering, because for me, I'm listening to the cello suite number 6, and then I listen to this, and I'm wondering, I think I understand what's going on. It's kind of like you're taking everything, all the noise elements almost in the cello suite, and you're like kind of converting it to your own musical language. Is that right?
Did I send you, I can't remember if I sent you, I think the program note is in. The program note I ended up sort of writing up for this, I think, is at the front of the score.
Okay.
And the recording I mentioned, because it really is, like those cello suites, I don't know if it's the same for you. For me, it was like my housemate at undergrad at Rice was a cellist and was like, you gotta listen to these recordings. It was Peter Wispelwey playing all 6 suites. And he, I think, even plays the 6th suite on an actual 5-string cello. But I've listened to that recording for decades, and it's one of those recordings that's just like, it's just in my brain. I don't know how it's actually engineered, but it's very, very closely mic'd. Like, it's very, like, you can hear him breathing, you can hear the bow, you can hear the fingers. Like, and that 6th suite is so, but it's so, like, visceral. It's
you
so
based
energetic.
it on a specific recording, too. It wasn't, like, the composition.
I thought there's no way to compete with this dude. Like I did have that first thought. Oh, because there's so many open strings in that piece. I thought, well, maybe I'll kind of map it, and there is kind of that, but that idea was kind of abandoned. What was more interesting to me was this, for lack of a better term, this kind of meta piece, right, where there's all this stuff floating around, and it's been kind of my. This kind of ties into some of the other more recent pieces where I'm really, the term I've used in my brain, which is not right, I think incidental music. Now, when you hear the term incidental music, you think of like music for a play or music that accompanies that. My dumb guy definition for this is like the music that happens when you're not, it's when other stuff is going on and your brain just kind of makes music out of it, right? Yeah, so so our house is like right here. Here's the LA River, and then it's the 5. And then by the time the noise of the 5 gets to you, it's got this very like diffuse, like, so at certain hours, it's like, it's like Ingram Marshall's fog tropes. It's like,
I love
there's like,
so right. For the people watching the score, because you have very special instructions. And this excerpt, you have these black note heads, right? So what does that mean exactly?
So it's funny because I just actually had this conversation with Patrick O'Malley, who had also looked at the score, and it's a solid diamond note head instead of a full one. And it's I've seen other scores where this is a little ambiguous. And again, I'm probably reinventing the wheel, but the black diamond head for me was the what I call a hammer-on in guitar. Like you just hard press the string down to the neck of the instrument to tap the note basically, but you're not actually pitching it. So it's like, it's basically, and I think, again, Erica does such an amazing job with like bringing all those sounds. So if I told her this, I think it's maybe the best realized of any of my pieces. I mean, she just poured everything into that. Recording. And it was recorded in this church in Portugal. It just sounds like and I think I must have known, I think I knew how resonant it was going to be. And I really wanted sounds, so there's a lot of like, playing like a harmonic and then kind of just letting it kind of go into the space sort of thing.
So like a pizzicato was like pulling the string.
Yeah, so it's like basically. Yeah, so pitzing is so you're plucking, but like if you know what a left hand pitz is, right? So it's just like you're just basically pulling an open string, but this is including now like if you just tap on the if you just pull the string down, you're going to get a sound, and so it works great in a solo context when there's nothing else to cover it up. And that's, again, a reflection. It's a reference to kind of the recording where it's like you hear the sounds of the playing of Bach, right? And all of the work that's going in, to produce these sounds. And that 6th suite to me has such a sheen over it anyway because of that D, da da da, or whatever. Because it just goes and just feels like everything is kind of ringing harmonically, overtonally from this D. I thought about that kind of like haze and sort of sheen of that. So it's like, it's as if, I think I wrote in the program note something like, it's as if all the sounds required to make, especially the prelude of the Bach Sixth Suite in D major, like kind of drifted away and sort of formed a piece of their own, like then froze at some point and sort of became this other piece. So there's a lot of insubstantial sounds in that, especially at the opening, right? Where it's just, you kind of get the sound of you get that kind of triplet rhythm with no sort of corresponding pitches. And the idea being that then that kind of forms into something else. I've been kind of obsessed with this recently about like the freeway thing, right? Like sounds kind of coming at you across the ether, and your brain is sort of desperate to sort of make them into tunes, chord progressions, shapes, you know, like the pneumatic brakes on a bus or something like that. You know, when you hear that kind of squeal and your brain's like, I wonder if I can make that into a chord. You know what I mean? Yeah. That kind of like where composer brain is just sort of running as you're kind of, you know, living your life kind of.
But that's the other thing too, is that I feel like a lot of composers are, in general, you know, we kind of have this baggage of the tradition, right? But there's also nothing wrong with of just thinking about things that are actually existing today and responding to that. But you did both of those things in that piece. You have the knowledge of the Bach. You love also. Yeah. Also, it's important to note that you love that Bach, that specific recording, which is personal to you. Yeah. So that is an added thing on top of that. It has to be something you're personally responding to, not just, oh, Bach is a great composer, I should respond to him.
I don't think I could have gotten into the piece without that. I think I had to have something where it was like thinking about kind of, you know, when I'm asked to sort of reflect on this sort of stuff, so much for me of like my introduction into classical music was solitary. I wasn't performing. I mean, I sang in a choir, but most of the stuff that my kind of new music education was like me and a pair of headphones, and kind of just that sort of, a lot of pieces kind of sometimes go back to that feeling of like just the sort of intimacy of like me learning and recording, or, you know, hitting a spot that I really liked and kind of rewinding it and playing it again, or rewinding it and playing it again. I'm dating myself now because there was an actual cassette that actually got rewound.
No, but it's funny too, because you have this experience of being to yourself, and also this idea that I like the idea of the freeway and the LA River, etc. But then you took that idea and you took the music to those places in your piece for Street Quartet. So this is a piece I want to play a couple minutes of this before we start talking about it, because we also know we have a mutual friend, Chiara Quartet, who was also on the show.
By the way, two beings from the video that you're about to show were on your show.
And Luna, the dog. Luna, yes, I actually texted her about it. But here's 2 minutes from Our Options Have Changed from 2022, another great title. Here we go. Chiara plays this microtonal melody, and as soon as I heard it, I said that's where the excerpt needs to start, because before that it was kind of like this introduction in the bathroom. They were in the bathroom, and there's all this stuff going on, and there's like a sink in the background, and you know,
this is not to plug,
like right next to each other.
This is not to shamelessly plug my own stuff, but you probably should watch the whole thing to know what Saad is talking about, because yes, it does start in a bathroom.
Yes, as one does.
As one does
during the day, right?
Yeah, exactly right. This is the day in the life. Yeah, this was super fun to put together. It was also logistically nuts. I mean, it was a head trip to sort of try to get all this organized. And I mean, I owe a debt of gratitude to Clara for kind of being open to the idea, but also really like pushing me at the time to actually get something materially out there, like to get something done, because we could have sat there and brainstormed spaces for ages about what do you mean
materially out there?
This, I mean, she's so funny. She's teased me before, because we've been having conversations for years, and I've always had this fantasy of like having these pieces that are in areas that you just wouldn't have a concert in. You just wouldn't, like, people can't get to, or that you just normally wouldn't have an audience sitting down. And I just love that idea of like, you're in this kind of sonic space that you never would be otherwise. I mean, there's a lot of these precedents for it, right? I mean, the fog tropes, the Ingram Marshall fog tropes that we mentioned, where you're really taking these kind of environmental sounds and you're treating them composerly, right? I've been kind of pitching this idea, and I think Clara knows me well enough. She's like, can we like make something? Can we actually do something? So we had been planning on doing a piece, myself collaborating with Argus, and I remember I sat down on a Zoom call.
Argus String Quartet.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this would have been like the fall of 21-ish, round about then. I was on a Zoom call with Clara and Marin, who's the violist of Argus Quartet, and this conversation started very kind of almost traditionally, like, it'd be great to have something where it had movements and that we could sort of take, we could play it in these, we could excerpt it if we needed to. And it went from there, and I think this must be kind of pandemic brain thinking of like, or we could do something completely off the beaten path. And here's my idea. And so Clara's like, okay, again with the playing outside thing. But they were so game for it, and they were. So I spent the kind of the spring of thinking, okay, how would I write a piece for film that would exist in multiple locations? And we'd had all these kind of plans of like, well, should I come out to New York? Because they're in New York and I'm in LA. Should I do this? Should we hire this person? Should we get permits for this? And I remember because I was working on the piece at a residency in the spring. And beautifully timed. I got my first bout of COVID there when I was there, so it was great. So I was working on the cello piece, the solo cello piece, and this piece for Argus, this like double quartet piece for them over film. And when I sort of was, kind of got over the worst of it, spent a demoralizing 2 days just emailing and calling around places in New York, being like, can we film in your church or your museum? Like inside, there's some like, how am I going to get this quartet into these spaces? And then I had a long conversation with Clara in which she was like, I feel like we've got a window for this. Like both the quartet and you, like you're on sabbatical, you just had this thing. This is now. Like we need to get something. Otherwise, it's just going to be kind of conceptual and sort of live in the ether for ages.
And live in the back burner.
And it's just going to be this idea that I keep talking about to her about. And she's like, I can't. I need you to actually put this into sort of tangible form. So not just helping me kind of work out what the sounds would be, not just encouraging me like, yeah, this idea is doable. Like we can do this. And not only that, we should do it. Like you just make it happen. And if we can't and I was like, I don't want you to have to like break the law. Like I don't want you to get, but we just thought about, okay, what are the locations we can access that would still make for an interesting narrative? So it became almost this kind of sort of, a little bit of that sort of like, pandemic, like we're all in a tight space and the piece then kind of opens up. You start in the smallest possible space. And they were the ones who were like, crammed into that bathroom. I think it was Giancarlo's bathroom there, right? And so starting from there, then moving to the stairwell, then moving to this underpass. And I've been thinking, which is so that's like some pedestrian underpass up in Fort Tryon, up in kind of north.
Yeah, it's like the most upper part of Manhattan.
It's near the cloisters, I think.
Yeah, I used to live near there. Yeah.
Okay, and then the sort of the climax, and then this is where it got logistically for me. It took me almost a kind of a full extra year to then put this together in the video, thanks to Louis Ng, who was amazingly was able to read my mind and put this together. But there's a kind of a duet between two completely different locations, and the last bit is on this sort of subway metro mezzanine in Brooklyn, which is where the sort of the piece kind of, it's the last. And then the very last bit is them all playing in the four locations, their kind of final chord all together. And they went and basically I made the score as best I could, being like, I hope this works.
And then we had another tune.
And then there'll be 11 C's coming up. No, but I planned it out as best I could, and then they just went to these locations over the course of 2 days, and just with iPhones and Zoom recorders, and just kind of put it, and just basically recorded everything.
Well, it's the piece. I mean, the first thing I thought of when I heard the piece, or watched the piece rather, is the Stockhausen Helicopter Quartet. Right. I mean, we're talking about tradition, right?
Yeah,
it's still you think that it doesn't follow tradition, or somebody that watches it that doesn't know much about contemporary music, they think, oh wow, you're doing something so out of the blue. But no, I mean, it was kind of already done, right? The Stockhausen. Yeah. If you haven't seen that, watch. There's a really famous.
Didn't I say that to you? Didn't I? I used to say this to some Composer Fellowship classes that came through, and I still say it to some students today. I was like, you're gonna feel pressure to be write the newest thing that's ever been written.
Of course.
And I said, remember that somebody has already written a string quartet for helicopters, so you don't worry about pushing the envelope. The envelope has been pushed. You just do whatever be authentic and be you. You don't have to. Nobody has to play your piece on Mars or something like that,
But this excerpt here with the microtonal melody, I mean, how does that fit into the rest of the piece? Because, if you look at the score, a lot of it is kind of not completely open. It's definitely very, very well notated in terms of this part is here, this part is here. It's not that open, but there's a little bit of openness.
It's very Lutoslawski. It's very, if you know the Lutoslawski string quartet, that was a model for me for so long about how to sort of coordinate otherwise uncoordinated music, right? Aleatoric music. Or I play this for 10 seconds and then wait until you get the cue from that. And then a lot of that stuff was stitched together in editing. We had to sort of tighten that up. But sorry, what was you were asking about
the microtonal melody, because before that, I mean, we didn't hear this in the excerpt, but before that it was kind of like a haze in the bathroom, right? Yeah. These kind of like harmonics that are kind of flying around. But then your first semblance of something you can really grab onto as a listener is that microtonal melody that Clara plays. Yeah. The violinist plays in the recording. Yeah. So I'm wondering, how did that emerge, or how did you come up with the idea to have a full-on tune in the middle of it?
So it's funny to say this as a composer who's supposed to I'm really feeling my way through this. I really feel like the last couple of years have been a kind of a weird experiment for me, and it's not always been successful. And I was just saying this to I was having composer therapy sessions with my other composer friends, where I really kind of want to see how I, for lack of a better word, what's my take on spectralism, or kind of because I'm, I my music from before. It's pretty much the old notes and rhythms kind of thing, and just been getting more into those kind of more, the cello pieces, more sort of insubstantial sounds that are kind of atmospheric, that you want to see if you can kind of coalesce a little bit more and see how that meets with sort of more traditional notes and rhythms. So that piece, the music for that, for Our Absence of Change, for me, and the way it was done, I feel like I want to keep going, because I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of make these sounds in this space. And my feeling was the resonance of those environments comes back at you with it reinforces some bit of information, right? The way the resonance of a certain room will emphasize certain frequencies. And so I'm kind of playing with that idea of what starts to come out of this haze is not necessarily, equal temperament, for example. It's not going to be this clean thing. And I almost, I want to kind of do another movement where it's maybe coming even a little more gradually. But I don't know if you sort of picked this up. What I also thought was that, sort of playing with the idea of that each space has its own sounds. So that middle section where they're all playing in Fort Tryon, they're playing, like, they're all tuned A440, and they're playing both kind of, you know, sort of regular notes, and they're also playing microtones. They're also playing kind of, you know, quarter tones and etc. When it gets to the part where they're playing with the group that's in the Brooklyn train station,
which is the section right after.
Right after, that group is they're all tuned down a quarter step, a quarter tone. And then so the microtonality of that middle section has now been split to two different
Right, you
groups.
introduce it as a tune, but then you bring it back harmonic.
So then you start to hear one group is just entirely playing kind of A440, and the other group is playing just a little bit off.
Right.
So you have this kind of like
seesaw.
Yeah, a little bit like, oh, there's this sort of, you know, almost like Doppler effect of these two things being sort of distant but still sort of trying to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And it's also a good excuse to kind of have those big chords. It sort of ends with these kind of like, you know, I guess it's a 16-note chord technically, because it's, you know, 4 sets of double stops in 2 locations with, you know, shifted a little bit.
It's kind of manic, and then plus
so manic.
And plus with the acoustical space,
right.
it even makes it more kind of unsure what you're listening to.
Oh, I was shocked when I heard how resonant that train station was, and then of course I left in like the arrival of the F train or whatever comes to that, you know. So there's a lot of other kind of sounds that kind of leak into that, you know.
So I would encourage everybody to listen to or watch the video, because it's not that long either.
It's 6.5 minutes or something like that. I thought it would be 4, and it ended up being 6.
So watch the whole thing so you can get a sense of what we're talking about here. But I want to move on to your piece for viola and piano, because this piece came 5 years before, right?
This is an oldie.
And this one, it's called, another great title, Here Come the Waterworks. I wish I could come. It takes me so long to come up with titles, and they're always just like one word, but these are nice little phrases.
My curse is that I can come up with titles, and the piece itself takes like 4 times as long as it should. So that's my.
But this piece here has a lot of that microtonal language that we're talking about. So let's hear the first couple minutes of this. I really like this piece because the chord that you put in the beginning literally is my chord.
I was going to say, it's when I read your thing and I saw your video about the kind of the A with the split fifth, right? The sort of the half, yeah.
You open the thing with D, F half sharp, A, and I just, you know, that's my jam. That's that chord I'm completely obsessed with, and you did something so different with it than I did in my piece that we heard my orchestra piece that we heard over the weekend.
Yeah.
And then another thing I liked a lot about this, sorry, I'm just going to blab on about this because I really love this piece, is that...
I guess I'll just sit here
while I talk about the piece that you wrote, but
cool.
it moves from this D sound, D, F half sharp, A, right, to G, right? So you do this kind of like, very traditional thing where you're going from 1 to 4. So you go to G, B half flat, D.
It's splitting all the open strings of the viola, right? So there, and in fact, at some point, I think, and even there, I split the C and the G as well. So there is a kind of that was just me trying to be like organized compositionally of thinking there is a kind of sort of chord that you can play all the open strings, the C, G, D, A of the viola, and they all have that kind of split sort of third going up. So they always have that kind of sound, of yeah, it's funny because I was thinking, somebody asked me, do you have a system? Do you subscribe to this? I was like, I need, this stuff just needs to sound interesting to me. I sometimes don't know exactly what's going on. And another, I have to, again, credit the performer. So that's Jonah Sirota playing. And I think I have a memory of like almost torturing poor Jonah because he played it through, and he again so committed to that performance. But I was going in at like a week from the premiere, being like, can you lower that like just like 10 cents or something like that? And he's like, so it's written out as just straight, quarter sharps and quarter flats. But I like worked with him on like, oh no, I want okay, yeah, right there. I want that one right there because I wanted that kind of color. And I think I wrote, there's a kind of a somewhat, vaguely programmatic thing about like, there's a kind of a keening kind of, there's a little bit of that sort of going on. There's a little bit of kind of, the viola's working through something. And there's that kind of, that's where the microtones, to me at least, because I think I self-consciously, I don't think I feel this way now, but I think I self-consciously at the time felt like, oh, I got to justify my microtones in some way. I thought they sounded cool, and I really wanted to sort of play with that sound. And it ended up kind of having a little bit of a sort of a kind of an emotional, let's say, narrative throughout, which is what I wanted to do anyway.
Well, that's why I liked the way you used microtones. I actually never heard, I don't know if that's true, but I remember at least, your kind of phase before this.
Yeah.
I don't think you really used microtones that much, except if they were like natural harmonics that were up.
Yeah, I thought about, there was a piece I did as a grad student that had microtones in it because I was obsessed with the Ligeti string quartet, and I think that's the first real encounter I had with microtones. And he uses it in a very kind of almost vocal expressive way that I really
and also the Ligeti viola sonata.
Exactly. Yes.
That was like my first.
Yeah.
My first introduction to how to do it in a melodic way in the Western context.
He's so specific about where he wants things. He really has an idea of like how it's supposed to.
So when you're doing these, because you mark quarter tones, right?
Yeah.
So this, technically speaking, a quarter tone, it would be, if you're going from C to C half sharp, right? That's 100 cents. You go from C to C half sharp, that's 50 cents.
So C to C sharp is 100 cents, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
And then C to C half sharp is 50 cents.
Right.
Right? So if you're telling me that you were telling the violist to adjust by 10 cents, they're not really quarter tones,
I wouldn't say, I wouldn't, hopefully, I mean, God, he can correct me, but I hopefully didn't give him cents because I was like, well, just like bring it down just like a little bit.
Yeah.
But he got it, like the thing is like he nailed it, like he.
But your ear also is adjusted to what you want to hear. It's not just like randomly I want to hear exactly the pitch in between. Yeah. There's like a certain flavor of that pitch. Yeah. It's got a kind of ring in a certain way, and especially it's also harmonic, right? Because it's not long after he plays that open fifth that the piano comes in, and immediately you've got another reference point. You've got a harmony against which that quarter tone is now kind of like, ooh, there's like a color in there. And again, that was very much like, I want these particular sounds, these particular clusters, where it's like, it's a major second, but it's like a little lower, it's a major second, but it's like a little higher, and you just get that really cool buzz, No, I don't know why I'm talking, like, you're like the master of quarter tones now, like, especially with this new piece. I'm like, hey, Saad, have you heard about these quarter tones? They're great. No, but I like this conversation because it reinforces some of the things that I'm thinking about too, because I hear so much music where the microtones are treated in such a way where it's like it's more of like a continuation of dissonance, right? Like you have the consonance dissonance spectrum, right?
Right.
And to me, like the pure third is like the most perfect, right? But then on the other side, they would say, okay, the most dissonant would be like, I don't know, like a C against a C half sharp or something like that. But I prescribe to this notion where you're using the microtones in such a way where you're actually creating a new consonance, right? Like a consonance that has nothing to do with how we view it in the Western context from Monteverdi and whoever back in that time. So I like, and you do both things. You don't just do the split third, the D, A, F half sharp. Later on, I think also in the excerpt that we heard, you do the whole thing where you're kind of sliding down.
It's a written out glissando essentially. It just kind of.
But it's not a glissando. You're literally saying, I want this to be here. The next note is just a little bit under, but don't slide. And the omission of the slide, the glissando, is an adjustment to your ear because you're used to the slide, and you hear the slide in Wagner and Mahler and all these like big portamenti that we're used to hearing. But when you omit the slide, you're putting these microtones in a completely different melodic context. They are the notes. Yeah.
Can I share this mug to your viewers? All right. So this is my favorite mug. Puffin. Nothing. It's a dad joke in mug form.
Well, you are dad.
This is right in my wheelhouse. This is where I'm at.
When you're choosing which notes to actually play without doing the glissando, you're putting the listener and the musician in a different reference point completely.
Yeah, the harmony is important to me, I guess I would say, right? It's not just the effect of the slide, for example. It really is it's the harmony that I care about, that I want to hear this. For me, I think the hardest thing about this, and I feel like every piece, like you were talking about at the very beginning, you're solving problems. I mean, for me, it's a way to really challenge myself, because it's really, I find microtones intriguing. I maybe I'm a little bit lazy about wanting to I don't want to spend time researching something when I could just be writing something and making it and just kind of figuring out sort of how I feel about it. But the pacing for me, I don't know how it is for you, but the pacing for me of, understanding that for a listener, this is a new world, maybe possibly, it's certainly maybe an unfamiliar world, and bringing them into that space with just the right timing, you know what I mean? So I think that affects maybe the opening of the viola piece, for example. I mean, it takes a while to sort of kind of is everyone are we okay? You got this? Everyone sort of get where we are? So there's quite a slow unfold to that reveal of that note, right? And then I think it starts to sort of pick up the pace a little bit. But there is a little bit of there's a timing thing that I always sort of, I think about a lot. It's challenging for me to sort of pace these things.
The timing is really all it is.
Yeah, right.
And
all composing is time management.
Yeah, I mean, when you start in D, also you're around this pitch center. Yeah. But you don't really change the pitch center. I'm like speaking Italian or something.
You're learning Italian, right? You've been learning Italian.
I know a little bit now, yeah. But by the end of it, we go to G, which I really appreciate because it helps the listener along. Because to kind of ignore everything that a listener knows, right? I don't think is terribly helpful either.
I mean, that does bring in the whole question of, the other thing I think about, with especially because teaching is so much on my mind. It's like, right, how to sort of coach, young composers through this and this constant struggle of what your wants and needs are as an expressive person versus who you are writing for in the kind of the big scheme of things. And my whole thing is always like, look, if you write the stuff that you're interested in and the questions you're really interested in exploring, and you approach it in a genuine way, then somebody's going to pick up on it. I think that's just sort of feeds my process a little bit in terms of I just want. It's fine. I have students here who I'm throwing all this stuff at them, and they're a lot of them are coming from that kind of media composer sort of film scoring world, and they say things like, I just want to write my pretty songs. I just want to write my... And I will go on some other spiel about broadening your mind. And then I go home and I'm like, I just want to write my pretty sound. It's the same way. I just want to write the stuff that I want to hear. And I think we probably, I'm sure that I'm be curious to hear more from you about, the stuff that you're writing is really sort of filling a need. You want to hear this stuff and you haven't quite heard it in the way that you're putting it together. I haven't quite heard it the way that you've put it together. You know what I mean? It's really exciting to hear that stuff and say, I'm still working on like, this is how this hits the spot. Like, this is really what sort of moves me. And you're kind of constantly looking for that, and hoping that other people are kind of going along for the ride too, you know?
I mean, you have to do what you think you love, right? I mean, it's not, I think you used the word interest. I don't even think that's enough. You have to really love what you're trying to achieve, or the prospect of trying to achieve it, at least. Maybe by the end you don't love what you did, but at least the prospect of getting to that spot is really important, I think. And what you said earlier about the Bach recording, I mean, that really hit home for me, because that's how I feel. Like, I want to achieve that feeling. You know, how do I do it for myself? And then once I figured it out for myself, I think about it more broadly in the context of an audience, especially if it's a freaking orchestra.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
You can't please everyone. If there's 3,000 people in the audience,
and they're coming to hear Sibelius and Tchaikovsky,
they're not gonna like every. You know, they're not. You can't expect them to like everything you do, but or even give you the light of day. You know, they might be thinking about something else, just waiting around, or, you know, maybe they're late by 5 minutes. I mean, you got to think about all these things. So. I think what you said about like having a profound like interest, love, whatever you want to call it, I think that's the seed of it, and then everything else, you know, just takes time. I mean, it's taken me. What is this? Who's calling me now? Who's calling me now? Oh, it's Clara. Let's see.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
I texted her actually. Let me see what Clara has to say. Okay, Clara Kim, who we've been talking about. She almost died when she saw it the first time.
When Luna was in there,
yeah, with the dog. Yeah,
we had a very funny emoji-filled text exchange when she saw Luna in the video. It was very funny.
Yeah,
it makes. I think I'm trying to capture, you know, dog TikTok, and, you know, and I'm trying to also, you know, new music,
almost
but also
there.
Like
there.
More cats and more dogs in my videos. The only thing I think to what you just said, like, I agree. The only like counter argument to that, and this is again me probably being like teacher brained about the whole thing, because again I'm mostly talking to students for whom the whole concept of new music is such a new unexplored world, is that, you know, that idea of interest or sort of the discomfort. And I think even I remember I watched a video of somebody else that you talked to who's talking about like that John Cleese interview, talking about like discomfort in the face of creativity.
Yeah, that was David Bennett Thomas.
Yeah, which is where that's kind of the headspace I'm in now, because I'm trying to be empathetic to my students for whom this is an uncomfortable experience. There's no other way to put it. But that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. That there's going to be that there's going to be that unfamiliarity. That there's going to be that sort of feeling of being lost, and that in itself is okay. That's an okay creative space to be in. I think for me, like, those touchstones of what you love and what you're interested in. I think really interested in, whether I'm successful or not, who the hell knows. I'm really interested in kind of maybe capturing a certain emotional arc, you know, without trying to necessarily be manipulative, or without sort of like, you've got to feel this way about it, but just saying, you know, this is emotional for me. This is really kind of an expressive outlet for me. And then if that can be joined with, you know, something that really does kind of keep me on my toes in terms of the material, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of like, because that's the thing about, like, you know, solving problems and interests. It's like, I think for me, this sort of transition to maybe like less pitched or sort of microtones or more ethereal or more kind of, you know, spectral noise-based stuff, is that there was a point where I was sitting down at the piano. It was like the same GD intervals were coming in. I was like, I've written this riff before. Like, I've played this before. I can't, it just feels like I know how this plays out, and I need to deliberately kind of make it more difficult for myself to get to. I have to. So you made a
problem for yourself in a way.
Yeah, right.
Which I think is the theme of this.
Right. No, exactly. It's
this,
like
show here.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm not being neurotic enough about my composing. Let's make it even more difficult. But I do just like that idea of like trying to make sense of something in which you don't have control over it. Like, this music is coming to you from some other place, without sounding too like, oh, the spirits are moving. But, like, you know what I mean? Like, literally from like, it's coming from some other place, and it's my job to kind of, you know, sort of shape it a little bit into something that kind of really rings with me. Like, really feels like, yeah, this is like, I can say something with this, you know.
I can't really follow any of that. So we're going to end it right now. So thanks for coming on. Well, thanks for having me at your school. And yeah, until next time.